33. The brain of man, especially in infancy, is like soft wax, fit to receive every impression that is made upon it. Education furnishes him with almost all his ideas at a time, when he is incapable of judging for himself. We believe we have received from nature, or have brought with us at birth, the true or false ideas, which, in a tender age, had been instilled into our minds, and this persuasion is one of the greatest sources of errors. 34. Prejudice contributes to cement in us the opinions of those who have been charged with our instruction. We believe them much more experienced than ourselves, we suppose they are fully convinced of the things which they teach us, we have the greatest confidence in them, by the care they have taken of us in infancy, we judge them incapable of wishing to deceive us. These are the motives that make us adopt 1,000 errors, without other foundation than the hazardous authority of those by whom we have been brought up. The prohibition likewise of reasoning upon what they teach us, by no means lessens our confidence, but often contributes to increase our respect for their opinions. 35. Divines act very wisely in teaching men their religious principles before they are capable of distinguishing truth from falsehood, or their left hand from their right. It would be as difficult to instill into the mind of a man, 40 years old, the extravagant notions that are given us of the divinity, as to eradicate them from the mind of him who had imbibed them from infancy. 36. It is observed, that the wonders of nature are sufficient to lead us to the existence of a God, and fully to convince us of this important truth. But how many are there in the world who have the time, capacity, or disposition, necessary to contemplate nature and meditate her progress? Men, for the most part, pay no regard to it. The peasant is not struck with the beauty of the sun, which he sees every day. The sailor is not surprised at the regular motion of the ocean, he will never draw from it theological conclusions. The phenomena of nature prove the existence of a God only to some prejudiced men, who have been early taught to behold the finger of God in everything whose mechanism could embarrass them. In the wonders of nature, the unprejudiced philosopher sees nothing but the power of nature, the permanent and various laws, the necessary effects of different combinations of matter infinitely diversified. 37. Is there anything more surprising than the logic of these divines, who, instead of confessing their ignorance of natural causes, seek beyond nature, in imaginary regions, a cause much more unknown than that nature, of which they can form at least some idea? To say, that God is the author of the phenomena of nature, is it not to attribute them to an occult cause? What is God? What is a spirit? They are causes of which we have no idea. O wise divines! Study nature and her laws, and since you can there discover the action of natural causes, go not to those that are supernatural, which, far from enlightening, will only darken your ideas, and make it utterly impossible that you should understand yourselves. 38. Nature, you say, is totally inexplicable without a God. That is to say, to explain what you understand very little, you have need of a cause which you understand not at all. You think to elucidate what is obscure, by doubling the obscurity, to solve difficulties, by multiplying them. O enthusiastic philosophers! To prove the existence of a God, write complete treatises of botany, enter into a minute detail of the parts of the human body, launch forth into the sky, to contemplate the revolution of the stars, then return to the earth to admire the course of waters, behold with transport the butterflies, the insects, the polypi, and the organized atoms, in which you think you discern the greatness of your God. All these things will not prove the existence of God, they will prove only, that you have not just ideas of the immense variety of matter, and of the effects, producible by its infinitely diversified combinations, that constitute the universe. They will prove only your ignorance of nature, that you have no idea of her powers, when you judge her incapable of producing a multitude of forms and beings, of which your eyes, even with the assistance of microscopes, never discern but the smallest part. In a word, they will prove, that, for want of knowing sensible agents, or those possible to know, you find it shorter to have recourse to a word, expressing an inconceivable agent. 39. We are gravely and repeatedly told, that, there is no effect without a cause, that the world did not make itself. But the universe is a cause, it is not an effect, it is not a work, it has not been made, because it is impossible that it should have been made. The world has always been, its existence is necessary, it is its own cause. Nature, whose essence is visibly to act and produce, requires not, to discharge her functions, an invisible mover, much more unknown than herself. Matter moves by its own energy, by a necessary consequence of its heterogeneity. The diversity of motion, or modes of mutual action, constitutes alone the diversity of matter. We distinguish beings from one another only by the different impressions or motions which they communicate to our organs. 40. You see, that all is action in nature, and yet pretend that nature, by itself, is dead and without power. You imagine, that this all, essentially acting, needs a mover. What then is this mover? It is a spirit, a being absolutely incomprehensible and contradictory. Acknowledge then, that matter acts of itself, and cease to reason of your spiritual mover, who has nothing that is requisite to put it in action. Return from your useless excursions, enter again into a real world, keep to second causes, and leave to divines their first cause, of which nature has no need, to produce all the effects you observe in the world. 41. It can be only by the diversity of impressions and effects, which bodies make upon us, that we feel them, that we have perceptions and ideas of them, that we distinguish one from another, that we assign them properties. Now, to see or feel an object, the object must act upon our organs, this object cannot act upon us, without exciting some motion in us, it cannot excite motion in us, if it be not in motion itself. At the instant I see an object, my eyes are struck by it, I can have no conception of light and vision, without motion, communicated to my eye, from the luminous, extended, colored body. At the instant I smell something, my sense is irritated, or put in motion, by the parts that exhale from the odoriferous body. At the moment I hear a sound, the tympanum of my ear is struck by the air, put in motion by a sonorous body, which would not act if it were not in motion itself. Whence it evidently follows, that, without motion, I can neither feel, see, distinguish, compare, judge, nor occupy my thoughts upon any subject whatever. We are taught, that the essence of a thing is that from which all its properties flow. Now, it is evident, that all the properties of bodies, of which we have ideas, are owing to motion, which alone informs us of their existence, and gives us the first conceptions of them. I cannot be informed of my own existence but by the motions I experience in myself. I am therefore forced to conclude, that motion is as essential to matter as extension, and that matter cannot be conceived without it. Should any person deny, that motion is essential and necessary to matter, they cannot, at least, help acknowledging that bodies, which seem dead and inert, produce motion of themselves, when placed in a fit situation to act upon one another. For instance, phosphorus, when exposed to the air, immediately takes fire. Meal and water, when mixed, ferment. Thus dead matter begets motion of itself. Matter has then the power of self-motion, and nature, to act, has no need of a mover, whose pretended essence would hinder him from acting. 42. Whence comes man? What is his origin? Did the first man spring, ready formed, from the dust of the earth? Man appears, like all other beings, a production of nature. Whence came the first stones, the first trees, the first lions, the first elephants, the first ants, the first acorns? We are incessantly told to acknowledge and revere the hand of God, of an infinitely wise, intelligent, and powerful Maker, in so wonderful a work as the human machine. I readily confess, that the human machine appears to me surprising. But as man exists in nature, I am not authorized to say that his formation is above the power of nature. But I can much less conceive of this formation, when to explain it, I am told, that a pure spirit, who has neither eyes, feet, hands, head, lungs, mouth, nor breath, made man by taking a little clay, and breathing upon it. We laugh at the savage inhabitants of Paraguay, for calling themselves the descendants of the moon. The divines of Europe call themselves the descendants, or the creation, of a pure spirit. Is this pretension any more rational? Man is intelligent, thence it is inferred, that he can be the work only of an intelligent being, and not of a nature, which is void of intelligence. Although nothing is more rare, than to see man make use of this intelligence, of which he seems so proud, I will grant that he is intelligent, that his wants develop this faculty, that society especially contributes to cultivate it. But I see nothing in the human machine, and in the intelligence with which it is endued, that announces very precisely the infinite intelligence of the Maker to whom it is ascribed. I see that this admirable machine is liable to be deranged. I see that his wonderful intelligence is then disordered, and sometimes totally disappears. I infer that human intelligence depends upon a certain disposition of the material organs of the body, and that we cannot infer the intelligence of God, any more from the intelligence of man, than from his materiality. All that we can infer from it, is, that God is material. The intelligence of man no more proves the intelligence of God, than the malice of man proves the malice of that God, who is the pretended maker of man. In spite of all the arguments of divines, God will always be a cause contradicted by its effects, or of which it is impossible to judge by its works. We shall always see evil, imperfection and folly result from such a cause, that is said to be full of goodness, perfection, and wisdom. 43. What, you will say, is intelligent man, is the universe, and all it contains, the effect of chance? No, I repeat it, the universe is not an effect, it is the cause of all effects. Every being it contains is the necessary effect of this cause, which sometimes shews us its manner of acting, but generally conceals its operations. Men use the word chance to hide their ignorance of true causes, which, though not understood, act not less according to certain laws. There is no effect without a cause. Nature is a word, used to denote the immense assemblage of beings, various matter, infinite combinations, and diversified motions, that we behold. All bodies, organized or unorganized, are necessary effects of certain causes. Nothing in nature can happen by chance. Everything is subject to fixed laws. These laws are only the necessary connection of certain effects with their causes. One atom of matter cannot meet another by chance. This meeting is the effect of permanent laws, which cause every being necessarily to act as it does, and hinder it from acting otherwise, in given circumstances. To talk of the fortuitous concourse of atoms, or to attribute some effects to chance, is merely saying that we are ignorant of the laws, by which bodies act, meet, combine, or separate. Those, who are unacquainted with nature, the properties of beings, and the effects which must necessarily result from the concurrence of certain causes, think, that everything takes place by chance. It is not chance that has placed the sun in the center of our planetary system, it is by its own essence, that the substance, of which it is composed, must occupy that place, and thence be diffused. 44. The worshippers of a god find, in the order of the universe, an invincible proof of the existence of an intelligent and wise being, who governs it. But this order is nothing but a series of movements necessarily produced by causes or circumstances, which are sometimes favorable, and sometimes hurtful to us. We approve of some, and complain of others. Nature uniformly follows the same round, that is, the same causes produce the same effects, as long as their action is not disturbed by other causes, which force them to produce different effects. When the operation of causes, whose effects we experience, is interrupted by causes, which, though unknown, are not the less natural and necessary, we are confounded, we cry out, a miracle, and attribute it to a cause much more unknown, than any of those acting before our eyes. The universe is always in order. It cannot be in disorder. It is our machine, that suffers, when we complain of disorder. The bodies, causes, and beings, which this world contains, necessarily act in the manner in which we see them act, whether we approve or disapprove of their effects. Earthquakes, volcanoes, inundations, pestilences, and famines are effects as necessary, or as much in the order of nature, as the fall of heavy bodies, the courses of rivers, the periodical motions of the seas, the blowing of the winds, the fruitful rains, and the favorable effects, for which men praise God, and thank Him for His goodness. To be astonished that a certain order reigns in the world, is to be surprised that the same causes constantly produce the same effects. To be shocked at disorder, is to forget, that when things change, or are interrupted in their actions, the effects can no longer be the same. To wonder at the order of nature, is to wonder that anything can exist, it is to be surprised at any one's own existence. What is order to one being, is disorder to another. All wicked beings find that everything is in order, when they can with impunity put everything in disorder. They find, on the contrary, that everything is in disorder, when they are disturbed in the exercise of their wickedness. 45. Upon supposition that God is the author and mover of nature, there could be no disorder with respect to Him. Would not all the causes, that He should have made, necessarily act according to the properties, essences, and impulses given them? If God should change the ordinary course of nature, He would not be immutable. If the order of the universe, in which man thinks he sees the most convincing proof of the existence, intelligence, power, and goodness of God, should happen to contradict itself, one might suspect His existence, or, at least, accuse Him of inconstancy, impotence, want of foresight and wisdom in the arrangement of things. One would have a right to accuse Him of an oversight in the choice of the agents and instruments, which He makes, prepares, and puts in action. In short, if the order of nature proves the power and intelligence of the Deity, disorder must prove His weakness, instability, and irrationality. You say, that God is omnipresent, that He fills the universe with His immensity, that nothing is done without Him, that matter could not act without His agency. But in this case, you admit, that your God is the author of disorder, that it is He who deranges nature, that He is the father of confusion, that He is in man, and moves him at the moment he sins. If God is everywhere, He is in me, He acts with me, He is deceived with me, He offends God with me, and combats with me the existence of God. O theologians! You never understand yourselves, when you speak of God. 46. In order to have what we call intelligence, it is necessary to have ideas, thoughts, and wishes. To have ideas, thoughts, and wishes, it is necessary to have organs. To have organs, it is necessary to have a body. To act upon bodies, it is necessary to have a body. To experience disorder, it is necessary to be capable of suffering. Whence it evidently follows, that a pure spirit can neither be intelligent, nor affected by what passes in the universe. Divine intelligence, ideas, and views, have, you say, nothing common with those of men. Very well. How then can men judge, right or wrong, of these views, reason upon these ideas, or admire this intelligence? This would be to judge, admire, and adore that, of which we can have no ideas. To adore the profound views of divine wisdom, is it not to adore that, of which we cannot possibly judge? To admire these views, is it not to admire without knowing why? Admiration is always the daughter of ignorance. Men admire and adore only what they do not comprehend. 47. All those qualities, ascribed to God, are totally incompatible with a being, who, by his very essence, is void of all analogy with human beings. It is true, the divines imagine they extricate themselves from this difficulty, by exaggerating the human qualities, attributed to the divinity, they enlarge them to infinity, where they cease to understand themselves. What results from this combination of man with God? A mere chimera, of which, if anything be affirmed, the phantom, combined with so much pains, instantly vanishes. Dante, in his poem upon Paradise, relates, that the deity appeared to him under the figure of 3 circles, forming an iris, whose lively colors generated each other, but that, looking steadily upon the dazzling light, he saw only his own figure. While adoring God, it is himself, that man adores. 48. Ought not the least reflection suffice to prove, that God can have none of the human qualities, altais, virtues, or perfections? Our virtues and perfections are consequences of the modifications of our passions. But has God passions as we have? Again, our good qualities consist in our dispositions towards the beings with whom we live in society. God, according to you, is an insulated being. God has no equals, no fellow beings. God does not live in society. He wants the assistance of no one. He enjoys an unchangeable felicity. Admit then, according to your own principles, that God cannot have what we call virtues, and that man cannot be virtuous with respect to him. 49. Man, wrapped up in his own merit, imagines the human race to be the sole object of God in creating the universe. Upon what does he found this flattering opinion? We are told that man is the only being endued with intelligence, which enables him to know the deity, and to render him homage. We are assured that God made the world only for his own glory, and that it was necessary that the human species should come into this plan, that there might be someone to admire his works, and glorify him for them. But, according to these suppositions, has not God evidently missed his object? First, man, according to yourselves, will always labor under the completest impossibility of knowing his God, and the most invincible ignorance of his divine essence. 2. A being, who has no equal, cannot be susceptible of glory, for glory can result only from the comparison of one's own excellence with that of others. 3. If God be infinitely happy, if he be self-sufficient, what need has he of the homage of his feeble creatures? 4. God, notwithstanding all his endeavors, is not glorified, but, on the contrary, all the religions in the world represent him as perpetually offended. Their sole object is to reconcile sinful, ungrateful, rebellious man with his angry God. 50. If God be infinite, he has much less relation with man, than man with ants. Would the ants reason pertinently concerning the intentions, desires, and projects of the gardener? Could they justly imagine, that a park was planted for them alone, by an ostentatious monarch, and that the sole object of his goodness was to furnish them with a superb residence? But, according to theology, man is, with respect to God, far below what the vilest insect is to man. Thus, by theology itself, which is wholly devoted to the attributes and views of the divinity, theology appears a complete folly. 51. We are told, that, in the formation of the universe, God's only object was the happiness of man. But, in a world made purposely for him, and governed by an omnipotent God, is man in reality very happy? Are his enjoyments durable? Are not his pleasures mixed with pains? Are many persons satisfied with their fate? Is not man continually the victim of physical and moral evils? Is not the human machine, which is represented as a masterpiece of the Creator's skill, liable to derangement in 1,000 ways? Should we be surprised at the workmanship of a mechanic, who should shew us a complex machine, ready to stop every moment, and which, in a short time, would break in pieces of itself? 52. The generous care, displayed by the deity in providing for the wants, and watching over the happiness of his beloved creatures, is called providence. But, when we open our eyes, we find that God provides nothing. Providence sleeps over the greater part of the inhabitants of this world. For a very small number of men who are supposed to be happy, what an immense multitude groan under oppression, and languish in misery. Are not nations forced to deprive themselves of bread, to administer to the extravagances of a few gloomy tyrants, who are no happier than their oppressed slaves? At the same time that our divines emphatically expatiate upon the goodness of Providence, while they exhort us to repose our confidence in her, do we not hear them, at the sight of unforeseen catastrophes, exclaim, that Providence sports with the vain projects of man, that she frustrates their designs, that she laughs at their efforts, that profound wisdom delights to bewilder the minds of mortals? But, shall we put confidence in a malignant Providence, who laughs at, and sports with mankind? How will one admire the unknown ways of a hidden wisdom, whose manner of acting is inexplicable? Judge of it by effects, you will say. We do, and find, that these effects are sometimes useful, and sometimes hurtful. Men think they justify providence, by saying, that, in this world, there is much more good than evil to every individual of mankind. Supposing the good, we enjoy from providence, is to the evil, as 100 to 10, will it not still follow, that, for 100 degrees of goodness, providence possesses 10 of malignity, which is incompatible with the supposed perfection of the divine nature? Almost all books are filled with the most flattering praises of providence, whose attentive care is highly extolled. It would seem as if man, to live happily here below, needed not his own exertions. Yet, without his own labor, man could subsist hardly a day. To live, he is obliged to sweat, toil, hunt, fish, and labor without intermission. Without these second causes, the first cause, at least in most countries, would provide for none of our wants. In all parts of the globe, we see savage and civilized man in a perpetual struggle with providence. He is necessitated to ward off the strokes directed against him by providence, in hurricanes, tempests, frosts, hailstorms, inundations, droughts, and the various accidents, which so often render useless all his labors. In a word, we see man continually occupied in guarding against the ill offices of that providence, which is supposed to be attentive to his happiness. A bigot admired divine providence for wisely ordering rivers to pass through those places, where men have built large cities. Is not this man's reasoning as rational, as that of many learned men, who incessantly talk of final causes, or who pretend that they clearly perceive the beneficent views of God in the formation of all things? 53. Do we see then, that Providence so very sensibly manifests herself in the preservation of those admirable works, which we attribute to her? If it is she, who governs the world, we find her as active in destroying, as in forming, in exterminating, as in producing. Does she not every moment destroy, by thousands, the very men, to whose preservation and welfare we suppose her continually attentive? Every moment she loses sight of her beloved creature. Sometimes she shakes his dwelling, sometimes she annihilates his harvests, sometimes she inundates his fields, sometimes she desolates them by a burning drought. She arms all nature against man. She arms man himself against his own species, and commonly terminates his existence in anguish. Is this then what is called preserving the universe? If we could view, without prejudice, the equivocal conduct of Providence towards the human race and all sensible beings, we should find, that far from resembling a tender and careful mother, she resembles rather those unnatural mothers, who instantly forgetting the unfortunates of their licentious love, abandon their infants, as soon as they are born, and who, content with having borne them, expose them, helpless, to the caprice of fortune. The Hottentots, in this respect are much wiser than other nations, who treat them as barbarians, and refuse to worship God, because, they say, if he often does good, he often does evil. Is not this manner of reasoning more just and conformable to experience, than that of many men, who are determined to see, in their God, nothing but goodness, wisdom, and foresight, and who refuse to see that the innumerable evils, of which this world is the theatre, must come from the same hand, which they kiss with delight? 54. Common sense teaches, that we cannot, and ought not, to judge of a cause, but by its effects. A cause can be reputed constantly good, only when it constantly produces good. A cause, which produces both good and evil, is sometimes good, and sometimes evil. But the logic of theology destroys all this. According to that, the phenomena of nature, or the effects we behold in this world, prove to us the existence of a cause infinitely good, and this cause is God. Although this world is full of evils, although disorder often reigns in it, although men incessantly repine at their hard fate, we must be convinced, that these effects are owing to a beneficent and immutable cause, and many people believe it, or feign believe. Everything that passes in the world, proves to us, in the clearest manner, that it is not governed by an intelligent being. We can judge of the intelligence of a being only by the conformity of the means, which he employs to attain his proposed object. The object of God is the happiness of a man. Yet, a like necessity governs the fate of all sensible beings, who are born only to suffer much, enjoy little, and die. The cup of man is filled with joy and bitterness, good is everywhere attended with evil, order gives place to disorder, generation is followed by destruction. If you say, that the designs of God are mysterious and that his ways are impenetrable, I answer, that, in this case, it is impossible to judge whether God be intelligent. 55. You pretend, that God is immutable. What then produces a continual instability in this world, which you make his empire? Is there a state, subject to more frequent and cruel revolutions, than that of this unknown monarch? How can we attribute to an immutable God, sufficiently powerful to give solidity to his works, a government, in which everything is in continual vicissitude? If I imagine I see a God of uniform character in all the effects favorable to my species, what kind of a God can I see in their continual misfortunes? You tell me, it is our sins, which compel him to punish. I answer, that God, according to yourselves, is then not immutable, since the sins of men force him to change his conduct towards them. Can a being, who is sometimes provoked, and sometimes appeased, be constantly the same? 56. The universe can be only what it is, all sensible beings in it enjoy and suffer, that is, are moved sometimes in an agreeable, and sometimes in a disagreeable manner. These effects are necessary, they result necessarily from causes, which act only according to their properties. These effects necessarily please, or displease, by a consequence of nature. This same nature compels me to avoid, avert, and resist some things, and to seek, desire, and procure others. In a world, where everything is necessary, a God, who remedies nothing, who leaves things to run in their necessary course, is he anything but destiny, or necessity personified. It is a deaf and useless God, who can effect no change in general laws, to which he is himself subject. Of what importance is the infinite power of a being, who will do but very little in my favor? Where is the infinite goodness of a being, indifferent to happiness? Of what service is the favor of a being, who is able to do an infinite good, does not do even a finite one? 57. When we ask, why so many miserable objects appear under the government of a good God, we are told, by way of consolation, that the present world is only a passage, designed to conduct man to a happier one. The divines assure us, that the earth we inhabit, is a state of trial. In short, they shut our mouths, by saying, that God could communicate to his creatures neither impossibility nor infinite happiness, which are reserved for himself alone. Can such answers be satisfactory? First, the existence of another life is guaranteed to us only by the imagination of man, who, by supposing it, have only realized the desire they have of surviving themselves, in order to enjoy hereafter a purer and more durable happiness. 2ndly How can we conceive that a God, who knows everything, and must be fully acquainted with the dispositions of his creatures, should want so many experiments, in order to be sure of their dispositions? 3rdly According to the calculations of their chronologists, our earth has existed 6 or 7,000 years. During that time, nations have experienced calamities. History exhibits the human species at all times tormented and ravaged by tyrants, conquerors, and heroes, by wars, inundations, famines, plagues, etc. Are such long trials then likely to inspire us with very great confidence in the secret views of the deity? Do such numerous and constant evils give a very exalted idea of the future state his goodness is preparing for us? 4thly If God is so kindly disposed, as he is asserted to be, without giving men infinite happiness, could he not at least have communicated the degree of happiness, of which finite beings are susceptible here below? To be happy, must we have an infinite or divine happiness? 5thly If God could not make men happier than they are here below, what will become of the hope of a paradise, where it is pretended, that the elect will forever enjoy ineffable bliss? If God neither could nor would avert evil from the earth, the only residence we can know, what reason have we to presume, that he can or will avert evil from another world, of which we have no idea? Epicurus observed, either God would remove evil out of this world, and cannot, or he can, and will not, or he has neither the power nor will, or, lastly, he has both the power and will. If he has the will, and not the power, this shews weakness, which is contrary to the nature of God. If he has the power, and not the will, it is malignity, and this is no less contrary to his nature. If he is neither able nor willing, he is both impotent and malignant, and consequently cannot be God. If he be both willing and able, which alone is consonant to the nature of God, whence comes evil, or why does he not prevent it? Reflecting minds are still waiting for a reasonable solution of these difficulties, and our divines tell us, that they will be removed only in a future life.